Right, okay. The title of my talk is Why I Am Anxious. Who am I? This is a question that often wanders into my mind. If you put this question to many people, the chances are they will identify themselves by referring to some of the following characteristics: race, gender, nationality, ethnicity, religion, etc., etc. For me, the answer to the question, who am I, eludes me. I can't find the meaning to this question. But in terms of generic facts, if they count for anything, I was born in Pakistan and came to England nearly 40 years ago. My heritage is Pakistani and Shia Muslim. But identity is much more complicated than this. This is not surprising given that we are individuals with very different heritage, personal history. As Amin Maalouf argues, every individual without exception possesses composite identity. He need only ask himself a few questions to uncover forgotten divergences and unsuspected ramifications, and to see that he is complex, unique, and irreplaceable. Even identical twins are not 100% identical. How can they be? We will have different experiences which inevitably will make them different. Experiences, in addition to the accident of birth, help to make individuals unique. In my talk, I will be using some of the ideas of Amin Maalouf. He is a Lebanese Christian, Arab. He left Lebanon as a refugee because of the Lebanese civil war and ended up in Paris in 1976 at the age of 27. He writes novels, essays, and opera librettos. I came across his book In the Name of Identity whilst researching for a paper on identity. This book, written nearly 20 years ago in 1998, is one which I would write now if I was able to. His words for me articulate beautifully what identity is all about, for me in any case. So who am I? I have some recollection of my childhood in Pakistan, but to all intents and purposes I am British, but at the same time not. I have a similar feeling towards my Pakistani heritage. I am Pakistani, yet I am not. How can I be a Pakistani when I spent the formative years of my life in England? How can I be a Pakistani when the language in which I'm fluent is English, whilst my mother tongue, if you can call it that, is Punjabi, which I'm neither able to write nor speak in any intellectual sense. Nevertheless, the nation, religion, language, culture, and the ways of my parents speak to me, as does the British culture and way of life. For Hannah Arendt, the German language was extremely important. She says, language remains. For her, everything else disappeared, but she still had the language. For me, unlike Arendt, the saddest aspect is the question of language. I came to the UK at the age of 7. I am unable to speak Urdu or Punjabi, both which are the national languages. Well, Urdu is the national language of Pakistan, and Punjabi is a provincial language at a high level, let alone read it or write it. And consequently, there is a yearning, a loss. I love poetry, and when I read Urdu or Persian poetry in translation, Persian has some similar words to Urdu, and it has influenced Urdu. I feel a stranger and ashamed for not being able to properly speak, read, or write it, but nevertheless, it speaks to me. So, am I half British and half Pakistani? Of course not. Identity can't be compartmentalized. You can't divide it up into halves or thirds or any other separate segments. I haven't got several identities. I've got just one, made up of many components in a mixture that is unique to me, just as other people's identity is unique to them as individuals. I'm a composite of British and Pakistani and many other things, all of which are in constant flux, constantly changing. Yet I am anxious because I do not feel I belong either in Britain or Pakistan. Perhaps I belong to both cultures, and this is part of what makes me me. I am poised between two countries, 2 or 3 languages, and several cultural traditions. It is precisely this that defines my identity. Would I exist more authentically if I cut off part of myself? But I should not fret, for in any event, what does it mean to belong to a particular place? Perhaps I am truly a cosmopolitan who has no need to belong to a particular nation. Yet, if I'm honest with myself, I do not belong anywhere, but I do wish to belong. I want to discover that warm, temperate isle where I will encounter my kind. But the question is, who are they? And do I really want to cut myself off from all life's myriad beings? There is a certain belief held by some people that an individual is essentially defined by their nationality, race, language, or religion. But this presupposes that deep down inside everyone there is just one affiliation that really matters, a kind of fundamental truth about each individual, an essence determined once and for all at birth, never to change thereafter. This obviously is a way of perpetuating ideas of us and them, groupings which can help give some people a sense of identity, a sense of belonging. But this also is a recipe for massacres, or for making others, people like me, feel uncomfortable. People such as Bruno Maigret, the former leader of the French far-right group Front National, believe that democracy cannot take place among a collection of individuals sharing no bonds among themselves, and even less among a juxtaposition of different ethnic groups, having incompatible cultural references. To exist and develop democracy requires a people, that is, a community of men and women who recognize each other as close by means of language, culture, faith, blood, and history. The idea that these people wish to perpetuate are simply myths. Such a conception of an immutable identity masks the fact that the nation-state is a very recent invention, and it is a myth. As Heater points out, it is only for 200 years that citizenship and nationality have been political Siamese twins. Moreover, the coming into existence of the nation-state was not trouble-free. For example, in 19th century France, in the process of nation-building, the state destroyed the pre-existing sense of distinct nationhood of the Bretons and Basques. Similar cases are taking place with Hungarian minority in Slovakia and Romania, the Kurds of Turkey, for example, and many more. Moreover, one need only look at maps of any nation or empire over time to see how the concept of a fixed national identity is a complete myth. For people like Maigret, Le Pen, and the Dutch far-right leader Geert Wilders, a real people is a community of men and women who recognize each other as close by means of language, culture, faith, blood, and history. Thus, for people of the far right, even if migrants completely assimilated and discarded their previous affiliations, they could still never be seen as French, British, or Dutch if they are not white, because part of being French, British, etc. for these people means being white. This idea of language, culture, faith, and history is a complete fabrication. And if one looks at the history of the British Isles over the last 2,000 years, one quickly realizes that there is no such thing as a pure English language, culture, faith, or history, and certainly not pure blood. Here, if you see 3 maps, the first one is about 2,000 years ago, map of Great Britain. And you can see there are various tribes, and they had separate identities, and they were kingdoms. And if you move along a little further along, again, you can see during Anglo-Saxon times, you have one tribe that dominated and became Wessex. But here also, due to the Danish invasion, you had something called Danelaw. So who existed, in that part of Britain. And then you had the French invasion, but it was not really French invasion because the Normans who came from Denmark or Norway, I can't remember now. And during around 1066, you have parts of France which belong to England. So, and today, again, it's all change again. So this idea of a national identity is a complete myth, even in terms of the peoples. I know they are myths, but yet I feel uncomfortable. Why should this be the case? I think part of my anxiety lies with being in a minority, and moreover in a minority of color, which means that no matter what I do, I will always stand out from the majority population. I could not change my name to John Smith, for example, and go unnoticed. Being brown means that even if I were to renounce my parents' heritage and completely assimilate into British culture, I do not believe I would be accepted as being British by some people. Unlike Jason, as he spoke earlier, he could quite easily pass as British, and nobody will think twice. But that would be very different in the case of me. Having said the above, it is nonetheless difficult to deny the contention that nationhood is sustained by the idea of solidarity and trust among its people, among its members, as it constitutes a collective political subject, a we, with a capacity to act collectively over long periods of time. Thus, nation-states will, I believe, remain significant in people's identity, categorization, and belonging. In fact, it is this very idea of nationhood that drives so many minorities to push for greater autonomy and independence. It is this which in part helps explain how the radical right or far right, whatever you may wish to call it, is able to perpetuate the lie of identity premised upon a shared history, culture, religion, etc. Malouf writes that people often see themselves in terms of whichever one of their allegiances is most under attack. And this reminds me of Arendt's words, if one is attacked as a Jew, one must defend oneself as a Jew. And like Arendt, this is a political response, purely political. There is no essentialization, no naturalization, no substance, just a simple predicate. I feel a Muslim in such terms, I think, and it is an aspect of me which is perhaps prominent. I feel particularly vulnerable being a Muslim because there is a certain image that is shown and perpetuated by the media and people from the far right. But I think not only from the far right, of Muslims as terrorists, fanatical, uncivilized, medieval in practice, etc. Even more horrific is that the media started using the term Islamist to describe fanatical groups such as Daesh. This term serves to tar a whole religion with the same brush. There are many who are unable to differentiate between these terrorists and the religion of Islam. Some sectors of the media and in the far right have been effective at promoting a conception of the European nation under attack from the invasion of the poor and foreign bodies. Antithetical cultures with particular antipathy reserved for Muslims and non-whites, threatening the European nation's life and health. There is a subtext which perpetuates the myth of Islam, unlike any other religion, being antithetical to democracy, whereas Christianity and or the West are predisposed to democracy. But is that really true? I feel like shouting which religion was it that was responsible for the Spanish Inquisition, which religion that forced Muslims of Spain and Sicily out, in addition to forcibly converting many. Which civilization was it that started 2 world wars, was responsible for the Holocaust, practiced slavery on an industrial scale, and allowed apartheid in South Africa and segregation in the USA, etc., etc.? And which religion was it that preached and practiced tolerance and was hungry for knowledge wherever it came from? Malouf highlights the myth of Christianity as being inherently good and Islam innately evil. He points out that Christianity's contemporary tolerance has arisen from centuries of violence and warfare, whereas Islam's present-day violent manifestation has come about from a long period of tolerance. Malouf argues that one must not forget that the text of a religion may not change, but people's interpretations change over the years. And I think a lot of people forget that you have a text, but it changes because people change. People impute interpretations on it. It doesn't stay static. Now, I'm not saying that Muslims are wonderful and the Western Christians are bad. The fanatics have taken center stage in the media, and although they have distorted the word of Islam, they still have many followers. But then again, people in the West forget their own fanatics. What I would like to highlight is that things are never as clear-cut as people portray them to be. There is nothing inherently antithetical about Islam and democracy, nor of any other faith, nor is there any predisposition of the West and Christianity towards being liberal and democratic. But to understand this takes a cool, dispassionate mind, whose way of life is not perceived to be under threat. It is the case that the part of one's identity that is threatened the most is the one that rises to the top, and is the one that seeks affirmation. Being a Muslim is part of who I am, but is not an essential part of me. It is something that defines my whole identity. It is not something that defines my whole identity. Yet I feel uneasy, or should I say I am made to feel uneasy about being a Muslim. Although the concept of assimilation is inherently abhorrent to me, I do believe that the radical right has a point. But for me, the question is one of integration. It is a question of respect, both on the part of the dominant culture and people and the minority or migrant cultures. Thus, both the host nation and the migrant need, for example, to respect who the other one is and not force change upon them. The precondition of acceptance into the host nation should never be of assimilation into the dominant culture, entailing that the migrant must renounce his previous heritage. One should not be made to feel obliged to choose. By making a person choose, you're asking that person to destroy a part of themselves, a part that has made the person who he is. One cannot cut off a part of oneself without affecting the composition of the whole. And a migrant who does not feel threatened and is able to be himself will surely be more amenable to the positive qualities in the host culture. Similarly, if the migrant is respectful towards the host nation's way of life, then he or she may also be made to feel more welcome. It is therefore important to teach migrants about the cultural values of their host country in order to prevent the lack of awareness of these different cultural values leading to misunderstanding and friction. This can be highlighted by the events around the 2015 New Year celebrations in Germany, where groups of mainly migrants of color behaved inappropriately and in some cases criminally towards females. Such behavior and other cultural misunderstanding need to be nipped in the bud, for example, by providing compulsory classes on cultural values that all migrants must attend. Finland seems to be at the forefront of such action by providing classes on Finnish values to its migrants. This amounts to teaching the decoding of social behavior and mores, to recognize the different cultural values which underpin or lead to such behavior. Thus, it could form part of some conditions associated with migration and naturalization. So, what is the solution? Malouf believes that identity should be seen as the sum of all our allegiances, and within it, allegiance to the human community itself would become increasingly important until one day it would become the chief allegiance, though without destroying our many individual affiliations. His central thesis is that every individual should be able to identify, at least to some degree, both with the country he lives in and with our present-day world. This involves the adoption of certain habits and types of behavior, not only by the individual himself, but also by the people around him, whether groups or other individuals. We should all be encouraged to accept the diversity of our identity, instead of having to raise one as the most important to the exclusion of others. Those who do not belong to the dominant culture should be able to accept that dual affiliation without feeling anguish, without feeling the need to conceal the culture like some shameful disease, at the same time being receptive to the culture of their adoptive country. Right, that's it.